The Real Sword SVD is a semi-automatic AEG manufactured in Hong Kong. It houses a proprietary gearbox yielding an elongated bore-up compression assembly, 28.7:1 ratio gears, a 690mm barrel, and externals that mirror the quality of its real steel counterpart.
Today, it's on my bench.
This SVD has seen 3 owners, one of which installed a Rocket high-torque motor and an SHS M130 spring. Given that most websites state that this gun shoots around 400 FPS, I believe that this current spring is why this gun fires around 410 with the .25 gram BB. This is how the gun performed when I first got it. I took 20 shots with this test, and the average is 512.5 feet per second with the .25 gram BB. And there's a 5.7 FPS difference between the minimum and maximum velocity tested here. The accuracy test involved me shooting a garbage can that was about 100 to 150 feet away. I used .30 gram BBs for this test because I personally would never field this gun with anything lighter than that. There was little to no wind, and I had the gun resting on the stool that you saw the chronograph on earlier. The can is around the same size as a small human torso. This gun already performs better than most stock snipers and DMRs. However, my job is to optimize the range, accuracy, and power even more. The owner purchased a Prometheus EG Type bore barrel that was pre-RHOP by Umbrella Armory. He also got a Prometheus purple bucking pictured here next to the stock one, and we also got a couple of M-nubs. We couldn't find a 690mm barrel, so we stuck with a 640mm barrel. It's only an 1.5 inch difference, and frankly, you'll see during the test that we aren't sacrificing that much. Before I install the new barrel, I have to shave the mound off the bucking. This is so the bucking slides over the RHOP patch without any issues.
Safety first.
I applied silicone oil so that the grindstone doesn't pull or tear the rubber apart. What I'm looking for is a clean removal of the unwanted material. Now that most of the mound is removed, I use sandpaper to smooth out the surface. The goal is to get the smoothest contact between the inside of the bucking and the RHOP patch. I prefer not to shave down the ridge inside of the hop-up bucking. I keep it because it actually prevents it from rotating over the barrel. And it also makes it easier to install the barrel into the hop-up chamber, especially if the fit is very snug. Now we have to figure out what to do with this nub. The problem is that the proprietary hop-up arm doesn't have a flat surface, and I don't want to Dremel it flat, because that would just ruin it. If he wanted to ditch the RHOP and go the traditional route, he would have to find a new arm or buy another chamber. I want to do something that can actually be reversed, and if so, I want it to be easily reversed. For starters, I can cut this nub to fit in this window. On the bright side, the arm presses downward at 90 degrees, which is ideal for hopping BBs. I left some room in the window because when the nub is pressed down, it will expand in width, and I don't want it to get wedged and detached from the arm. As for the arm, I cut a bucking in half, and I glued it in order to make a flat surface to adhere the M-nub to. This can be reversed with glue gun or a razor blade if desired. This upgrade alone resulted in a 34 FPS increase, and the shots are a lot more consistent now, therefore they're more accurate. As you can see, the difference between minimum and maximum shot is 3.4 FPS instead of 5.7 like the last test. And of course, this test was also conducted with .25 gram BBs, and I fired 20 shots. I ran the same conditions as the last test, except I included a box as it makes a louder noise when hit. I know it's not scientific, but it actually makes it easier for me to edit this video, and I promise I was aiming for the same torso size square area. In the end, the results were only slightly better, but I could also just be a really bad shot, and wind also plays a big role in this. And here's rapid fire, because realistically, this is how airsofters shoot at each other. We got great results with the R-hop job, so now it's time to get this gearbox situated. I'll admit, this was the first time I worked on an SVD, so it took me a sec to get it out of the body. Once I got it out though, it was a piece of cake. Here I'm observing the trigger mechanism and the small gears, springs, and tidbits outside the shell. It helps to understand what everything does before you take it all apart. Here I'm pre-gaming the MOSFET, which means I'm measuring wires, I'm mapping it all out in my head. I can only really settle for perfection here because there's a very limited amount of space between the receiver and the gearbox. And on top of that, this mechanism relies heavily on the small pieces outside the shell. Misplaced wires would actually end up disrupting that. Removing the wiring harness from the body actually required a soldering iron or snippers, so I've taken a note of this and I'll end up solving this later on. Somebody before me actually installed a rocket high torque motor in here. It's very cool, but it's not enough for the trigger response that I want. I want more torque. So here I'm just playing with the motors, testing them out, comparing magnets and all that jazz. It's really important when getting a new motor to break in the brushes. You want really good contact between the brushes and the commutator. One way to do this is to get a weak, almost drained battery and just run the motor until the battery dies. This wears the brushes nice and evenly without producing sparks or like roughly tearing it all up. So here's me opening the gearbox for the first time. Yeah, so the anti-reversal latch was a bit tricky to access. This isn't really going to be an in-depth look at the internals. I really just want to showcase the upgraded performance when it's all done. So we got the motor cage in here, and this thing is actually very, very solid. As you can see, it's moving around now. But even though this is rotating, it's not moving that way at all. It's only rotating a little bit. And that little bit is fine. And to be honest, I think when it's in the stock, it might not even do that. Yeah, this thing does not rotate inside the stock. That pretty much just takes care of itself right there, which is really good. It's excellent. Now we can actually get in here. We can see where our shimming's at. We have just a little bit, slightest amount of play. I want to see if I can reduce that a little bit. This footage is useless, and I'm probably not even going to use it. That's better. We're gonna see how this sounds in comparison. I like to put Teflon tape underneath the cylinder head O-ring as it prevents Teflon from actually tearing and getting caught up in the wrong parts of the gearbox you don't want it in. I use these neoprene faucet washers as pads. I use these because they don't compress like many sorbo pads in the airsoft market do. And, when those pads compress, it actually changes your angle of engagement. So you can actually set AOE with these faucet washers. Gotta include that delayer chip, though. Here's some of that neat wire routing I was talking about before. I really made it a point to try to fit these wires into the grooves that were made for the stock wires. And here are the quick detach bullet connectors I used to get around the disassembly issue earlier. I also kept that little plastic clip that glues onto the inside of the receiver. This is how the wires fit into the gun for easier disassembly. As a tech, this is obviously a big deal. If I have to take the gun apart again, this is necessary. Very tricky to fit the wires this way, but, it got done, so that's great. And here I'm just double checking that wire fitment with the magazine in and the front assembly on. Alright, so I got it closed, and we're going to test it now. We're going to see how it goes. So here's a little quick time lapse of me putting it back together. So the spring guide doesn't have a hole to place the tool through like every other spring guide out there, so it was very challenging to say the least. I should also mention that I dremeled the second and half of the third tooth for angle of engagement. I gotta say, when I got the gearbox closed and I test fired it, I was really pleased with the overall snappiness and smoothness of the gun. It was pretty nice. So since we have an M150 in here, there's going to be an obvious change in FPS. It's clearly higher here. However, the deviation between the lowest and highest reading is the same in this test as it was in the first test. We actually got better consistency the second time around. However, a 5 FPS deviation is still really good. So same parameters as last time, we're running 3.0 gram BBs, same distance. I went back to using the trash can since the gun shoots harder now. And you know what? The consistency and the accuracy of these shots are pretty much the same as the last test. But there's always human error involved in something like this. The gun isn't actually fixed to anything like a clamp. So, that's to be expected. I think the rapid fire test actually does a better job showing how much more consistently it shoots than, my attempt at fixing the gun on a stool.